Part 1. The deal made. James Danner had never expected his life to spiral down to this point. A year ago, he had been one of the most successful merchants in the galaxy, his fleet of trade ships flying between planets, bringing in profits like clockwork. But the universe had a way of humbling even the most confident. A series of bad investments, coupled with an unexpected galactic tax audit, had left him with nothing. His ships were impounded, his inventory seized, and his debts piled up higher than the stars themselves. Desperation weighed heavily on James's shoulders as he sat in his small office on the edge of the city, staring at the last bit of his dwindling funds. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," James called, his voice flat, drained of any hope. The door slid open, and in stepped a man in a dark uniform. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wore the insignia of the Galactic Trade Council, an organization that had the power to ruin lives with a single command. The man's expression was unreadable as he approached the desk. "Mr. Danner," the officer began, his voice cold. "I represent the Galactic Trade Council. We've come to discuss your debts." James looked up, his eyes weary. "I know what you're here for. I can't pay it. I've told you 1,000 times. I've lost everything." Officer raised a hand, cutting him off. "We know. And that's why we've come up with an alternative solution." James blinked, confused. "What do you mean, an alternative solution?" The officer stepped closer, his gaze never leaving James's face. "We offer you a trade," he said. "You accept an alien slave as payment, and we'll consider your debts cleared." James's heart skipped a beat. "A slave," he echoed, incredulous. "Are you serious?" "Yes," the officer replied. "We have access to various species from across the galaxy. The slave will be yours to do with as you see fit. Consider it your final chance to start over." The thought of owning another living being was repulsive to James. Yet his mind raced with the reality of his situation. He was losing everything. He had no choice but to take the offer. I don't have any other options, do I?" James asked, his voice barely a whisper. The officer's lips twitched as if he could see the defeat in James's eyes. "No, you don't." "Right," James muttered, feeling sick to his stomach. "I'll take the slave." The officer nodded, his expression now impassive. "You will meet her tomorrow, I suggest. You prepare yourself." The next day, James stood in the courtyard of his small estate waiting. His stomach churned as the thought of having another person, another living being as property sank in. Officer appeared again, leading a figure behind him. She was unlike any being James had ever seen. The woman was tall, with an elegant, almost ethereal presence. Her skin was a pale shade of blue, almost translucent under the light, with faint markings running along her arms and neck. Her eyes were the color of deep, endless space, and they held an air of sadness that spoke to James on a level he couldn't explain. She was stunning, but it wasn't her beauty that struck him most, it was the cold, empty look in her eyes, as if she had been broken by something far worse than slavery. "Her name is Arya," the officer said, his voice devoid of empathy. "She is yours now, Mr. Danner." James didn't know what to say. Couldn't bring himself to speak, let alone give her commands like the officer expected. Arya stood silently, her eyes cast downward, her hands bound with metallic cuffs. James could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. This was his reality now, reality where he had no control, and an alien woman was his to command. "For servitude," the officer continued. "You may use her as you wish. We'll leave her with you now, and you can send for us when you've made arrangements." With that, the officer turned and walked away, leaving James and Arya alone. The silence between them was thick, uncomfortable. James shifted on his feet, unsure of what to do next. "Arya," he said, testing her name on his tongue. She didn't respond. He couldn't blame her. He glanced at her, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He had agreed to this, but he hadn't expected it to feel so wrong. Looking at her again, he felt a strange mix of guilt and pity. "Look, I don't know what to do here," James said, trying to break the silence. I'm not going to treat you badly, okay? You don't have to fear me." Arya didn't move, her eyes still lowered. The room grew even quieter, the only sound being the soft rustle of the wind through the trees. James walked toward her slowly, feeling the weight of the situation more acutely than ever. He wasn't sure how he could go from owning her to seeing her as something more than a slave, but for some reason, a part of him knew he didn't want to see her as just that. "Are you hungry?" he asked awkwardly. "I can get you some food." "Not sure what you eat, but I'll find something." There was no response, no indication that Arya even heard him. She remained still, her face as unreadable as the void of space. For the rest of the day, James tried to make her comfortable. He had a small apartment with a few amenities, but it wasn't much. He felt out of place trying to act like he was supposed to be in control when he felt completely helpless himself. He had no idea what kind of life Arya had lived before, or what had brought her to this point. But one thing was clear. She wasn't just another slave. As night fell, James sat on the couch, staring at the empty chair across from him. He should have been relieved that his debt was cleared, but he felt nothing but emptiness. And yet, something told him that this was just the beginning of a far more complicated story. Part 2. Life Together. Days that followed were strange and uncomfortable for James. He had never expected to find himself in a situation like this. And every time he looked at Arya, the alien woman who was now in his care, he felt a mix of guilt, curiosity, and confusion. He had always been a straightforward man, focused on business and survival, but now, facing the reality of owning another living being, he didn't know how to proceed. Arya didn't speak much. In fact, she hardly spoke at all. She would only nod or shake her head when James tried to engage her in conversation, but her silence wasn't the same as indifference. James could see the sadness in her eyes, the heavy weight of her past that clung to her like a shadow. Every now and then, he would catch a glimpse of her trying to do something on her own, like making her bed or preparing a simple meal. But she always did it with such precision and quiet focus that it seemed almost ... unnatural. James didn't know how to treat her. Was she truly his slave? Was he supposed to give her commands and use her as he saw fit? The thought made him feel uneasy, as if something deep inside him was telling him that he should be treating her differently. One evening, after a long day of work, James came home to find Arya sitting by the window, staring out at the horizon. She had become a part of the space that had once been his home, but now it felt emptier, as if the room itself was waiting for something to change. "Arya," James called softly, taking a few steps toward her. She didn't turn around. "Are you feeling?" Arya didn't respond, but James noticed the way her hands were clenched in her lap, her knuckles white. He had seen the same look in the eyes of many people who had been through something traumatic. It was as if she was trying to hold herself together, to stop from falling apart. "I'm sorry about all this," James said, his voice quiet but genuine. "I never asked for any of this to happen. But I'm not here to hurt you. I just... I don't know what to do either." There was a long silence between them. James couldn't help but feel helpless. He had always been in control of his life, always found a way to make things work, but this was different. Arya wasn't like the people he had dealt with in the past. She wasn't a commodity to be bargained for or traded away. She was a person, a woman, with her own story, her own past, her own pain. And he wasn't sure how to handle any of it. Arya finally turned her head to look at him, her eyes dark and unreadable. She said nothing at first, but James could see the conflict in her gaze. "I didn't want this either," Arya said, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't choose this, but I'm here now, and I don't know what to do either." James blinked in surprise. He had never heard her speak so much before. It felt like a crack had opened in the wall she had built around herself. "I can't imagine what you've been through," he said, his voice gentle, "but I don't want you to feel trapped here. You're not a prisoner. I don't want to control you." Arya's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no anger in them. It was more like ... skepticism. "You say that now," she said softly. "But what happens when you get bored with me? When you see me as nothing more than a tool to make your life easier?" James opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? She wasn't wrong. He'd accepted her because it was convenient, because he had no other choice. But now that he saw her as a person, it made everything feel more complicated. "I won't do that," he said finally, his voice firm. "I promise you, I won't treat you that way. I can't undo what's been done, but I can try to do better. If you want to leave, I'll help you. If you want to stay, I'll respect that." Arya's gaze softened ever so slightly, but she still didn't speak. She turned her attention back to the window, as if contemplating his words. For a long while, the only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioner, the sound of the wind outside. The next day, things felt a little different between them. James was careful not to make assumptions about Arya's feelings, but he noticed that she seemed more willing to engage with him. She started helping with the small tasks around the house, cleaning, cooking, organizing things she'd never done before. There was a sense of quiet dignity in everything she did. It was as though she was trying to reclaim some sense of control over her life, even in the smallest ways. James began to see the depth of her intelligence. She wasn't just skilled in household chores. There was a quiet brilliance in her. She could read, understand complex texts, and even fix machinery, something James hadn't expected from someone he had thought of as little more than a slave. He had always underestimated her, assuming that because she was bound by chains, she was somehow less capable. But as the days turned into weeks, James realized how wrong he had been. One evening, after a particularly difficult day of running his business, James returned home to find Arya working on an old data console. She was deep in concentration, her fingers moving quickly over the keys, her brow furrowed in thought. "What are you doing?" James asked, stepping into the room. Arya didn't look up, but her voice was calm. "Just fixing the communication system. It was outdated, and I found a way to improve its efficiency." "You know how to do that?" Arya glanced up at him for a moment, then went back to her work. "I've had to learn many things in my life. You'd be surprised what a person can do when they're forced to." James stood in the doorway, watching her for a long moment. He didn't know much about her past, only what little she had revealed about her royal status, her exile, and the betrayal she had faced. But as he watched her now, he realized just how much he still had to learn. There was no question in his mind anymore. Arya wasn't just some alien slave. She was something far more complicated, far more valuable than that. And whether he liked it or not, their lives were now intertwined in a way he couldn't undo. He didn't know where this would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her go. Not now, not ever. Part 3. The secret revealed that it had been several weeks since James had first met Arya. Since then, his life had slowly started to change, though not in the way he had expected. Every day he learned something new about her quiet strength, her intelligence, her calm demeanor. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. She wasn't a typical servant or slave. She was a woman with a past, and slowly, her past was starting to catch up with her. One evening, as James was working late in his office, the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. It wasn't unusual for Arya to come and go, but this time, something felt different. James looked up from his work to see her standing in the doorway, her posture tense, her eyes scanning the room. "Arya?" James called, rising from his desk. "Everything okay?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped into the room, her movements slow and deliberate. She was wearing the same simple clothes she always wore, but there was something about her tonight, a sense of urgency, a quiet storm building beneath her calm exterior. "James," she said, her voice low, "we need to talk." James frowned, setting aside his work. "Of course. What's going on?" Arya took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. She seemed like she was struggling with something, fighting the urge to say what had been weighing on her for so long. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer now, almost as if she was admitting something painful. "My real name is not Arya," she said quietly. "That's just the name I've been using since ... Since everything happened, James felt a flicker of surprise. He hadn't realized how little he knew about her, despite the time they had spent together. He had only heard bits and pieces about her past, most of it guarded or unspoken. But now, The tension in her voice told him this was more than just a casual confession. "What's your real name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Arya hesitated, but then finally met his eyes. "I'm Princess Ariona Zinthara," she said, the words almost a whisper, as though she was ashamed of them. "I was the heir to the Zinthar Empire," the revelation hit James like a thunderclap. His mind raced as the name Zenthora registered. The Zenthor Empire was one of the most powerful and wealthy civilizations in the galaxy, known for its advanced technology, vast resources, and ruthless politics. A princess. A royal. He looked at her again, as if seeing her for the first time. "Princess?" James repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "But, how? How did you end up here?" Aria's eyes flickered with a mix of pain and anger. She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, as if to shield herself from the memories she was about to bring to light. "I was betrayed," she said, her voice growing stronger, though the bitterness in it was clear. "My own family, my own people, they turned against me. A coup was planned against the throne, and I was exiled. They forced me into servitude to erase any trace of my existence. I was sold to the highest bidder, and ended up here." James was stunned. He had always known there was something different about her, but a princess, a royal heir no less, could hardly wrap his mind around it. His thoughts were spinning, trying to make sense of everything he had learned in just a few moments. "But why didn't you tell me this before?" James asked. "Why keep it a secret?" Arya looked away, her expression hardening again. "Because no one can know. If anyone finds out who I really am, the Zinthar Empire will come after me."
"Oh."
"Come after you. My family wants me back, but only to use me for their own power. If they find out I'm alive, they'll stop at nothing to reclaim my hand, destroy anyone who stands in their way." James felt a chill run down his spine. He had known from the beginning that Arya was no ordinary woman, but this was something else entirely. He had unwittingly been caught in the middle of a galactic conflict, one far beyond his understanding. "So what does this mean for us?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. "What happens now? What do we do?" Arya's gaze softened as she looked at him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and gratitude. "I don't know. I've been running for so long, hiding from my past, but now it's catching up with me. I can't keep hiding forever." James thought for a moment, his mind racing as the weight of the situation settled over him. He didn't know anything about royal politics or galactic empires, but one thing was clear. He couldn't just let Arya go. Not after everything they had been through. "We fight," he said, his voice steady, determination rising in his chest. "We fight together. I don't care who they are or how powerful they are. You're not alone in this anymore." Arya looked at him, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to read him, trying to understand if he truly meant what he was saying. For the first time since they had met, she seemed to soften, a flicker of hope in her gaze. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded firmly. "I'm sure. You're not just some slave, Arya. You're a person. And I'm not going to let them take you away." A small smile appeared on Arya's face, though it was tinged with sadness. She had been prepared to face her past alone, to keep running and hiding. But now, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might have a chance at something. "Better, thank you," she said softly. James reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out together." As the room fell silent once more, James felt a strange sense of resolve settle over him. They were no longer just two strangers caught in a terrible situation, they were allies. And for the first time since everything had begun, James believed that they had a chance at something more, something worth fighting for. But as Arya's past caught up with them, they both knew that the real battle was only just beginning. Part 4. The growing bond. James sat on the edge of his bed, his mind racing with everything Arya had revealed to him. She wasn't just an alien slave, she was a princess, exiled from her empire, hunted by her own family. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him, but amidst the turmoil, something else was growing, something he hadn't expected. As he thought about the days since Arya's arrival, he realized that his feelings for her had shifted in ways he hadn't fully understood. Until now, she wasn't just a person he had to protect. She was becoming someone he cared for, someone he didn't want to lose. The quiet moments they shared, the small conversations, the way she had quietly helped him around the house, it all added up. James didn't just admire her strength and resilience. He was beginning to trust her in ways he never had with anyone before. The soft sound of footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He turned to see Arya standing in the doorway of his room, her eyes hesitant, her posture stiff. Moment, she didn't say anything. She simply stood there, looking at him. "Arya," James asked gently, getting to his feet. "Is everything okay?" She looked away, not meeting his eyes. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, her voice soft but steady, "about what you said about fighting back, about standing with me." James walked over to her, his heart pounding. He could tell this was important to her, that something was weighing on her mind. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice calm. Arya hesitated, then finally looked up at him. "I don't want you to risk everything for me," she said, her eyes filled with both gratitude and concern. "You don't know what my family is capable of. The Zinther Empire doesn't just conquer planets, they destroy them. If they come for me, they'll come for you too." James shook his head. "I'm not afraid of them," he said, his voice firm. "I'm not going to stand by and let them take you. You're not alone in this, Arya. You've been running for so long, but now you've got someone who will stand beside you." She looked at him for a long time, her expression unreadable. Then, after a moment, a faint smile appeared on her face. It was small, but it was enough to make James's heart skip a beat. "Thank you," she whispered. "I never thought I'd find someone who would be willing to stand with me. I've always had to carry this burden alone, but now," she trailed off, her voice catching slightly. James stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to carry it alone anymore," he said. "We'll figure this out together, whatever it takes." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared promise hung in the air, a silent understanding that they were now bound together by more than just circumstance. There was something deeper between them now, something that had grown in the quiet moments, in the trust they had begun to build. Arya took a deep breath and looked down at the floor, her eyes closed. "I never wanted this life," she said softly. "I never wanted to be a princess, to live in the shadow of my family's politics. But now, I don't know who I am anymore." James's heart went out to her. He had seen the pain in her eyes before, but now it seemed more real, more present than ever. He didn't know what it felt like to be the heir to an empire, to live with the weight of an entire galaxy on your shoulders. But he did know what it felt like to be lost, to feel like the future was slipping away, and that nothing was certain anymore. "You don't have to be a princess here," James said, his voice gentle. "You're just Arya, just a person like anyone else, and that's who I see. I don't care about your past or your title. I care about you." Her eyes met his, and for the first time since they had met, James saw a flicker of something he hadn't seen before. Hope. It was small, but it was there. "James," she said softly, stepping closer to him. "You don't understand. My family will never stop hunting me. They'll never stop until I'm either back under their control or ... dead." James felt a chill run down his spine at her words. He knew the Zinther Empire was powerful, but he hadn't fully understood the lengths they would go to in order to reclaim what they saw as theirs. He had only seen glimpses of Arya's fear, but now it was clear her family would stop at nothing. "Won't let that happen," James said, his voice steady. "We'll fight. We'll figure out a way to stop them. Do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Arya didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stood there, looking at him, her face softening as if she was finally allowing herself to believe his words. "Thank you," she whispered again, this time her voice full of emotion. "You don't know what this means to me." James smiled, a feeling of warmth spreading through him. "I may not know everything you've been through, Arya, but I know one thing. You're not alone anymore." The moment stretched between them, the silence heavy but filled with something deeper, something stronger than just words. They were no longer strangers to each other. They were no longer just a man and a woman, forced together by circumstance. They had become something more, a team, an alliance born out of shared hardship and mutual trust. The road ahead would be difficult. James knew that. But as he looked at Arya, standing before him, the weight of her past and her fears still in her eyes, he also knew that they were ready to face it together. The battles ahead might be fierce, but as long as they fought side by side, James believed they could overcome anything. Tomorrow, James said after a long pause, his voice determined, we start preparing. We'll take the fight to them. Arya nodded, a quiet resolve settling over her. Tomorrow, she agreed, her voice steady. We fight. And for the first time since their journey began, James felt the stirrings of something else, something more than just survival. It was hope, and it was the first real hope either of them had felt in a long time. Part 5. The Empire's return. The days following their conversation were filled with a quiet, determined energy. James and Arya spent most of their time preparing, but neither of them could shake the feeling that their time was running out. Zinther Empire was vast and ruthless. If they came after Arya, it wouldn't just be a matter of running. It would be a fight for survival. James spent hours going over old maps, studying the star systems that the Empire controlled and looking for any weak points. Arya helped, offering her insights into the Empire's military strategies, though she still held back many details. She didn't want to put him in more danger than he was already in, but James knew she was holding back, keeping pieces of her past locked away. He didn't press her for more, though. Not yet. He knew that when she was ready, she would tell him. One evening, as they were finishing up their planning session, a loud knock echoed through the front door. James froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Arya's expression shifted, her face pale as she quickly stood up from the table. She didn't need to say a word. He could see the fear in her eyes. They're here, she whispered. James moved quickly, his mind racing as he glanced around the room. There was no time to waste. The door knocked again, this time louder, more forceful. They were not here for a conversation. Stay behind me, James said, his voice firm. Whatever happens, I'll protect you. Arya didn't argue, though her eyes flashed with something fierce, something protective. James had seen that look before, the kind that came when someone had everything to lose. She was ready, even if she didn't want to be. As the door opened, a man stepped inside, tall and imposing. His armor gleamed in the dim light, and his face was hidden behind a helmet.
Oh.
But there was no mistaking the insignia on his chest. He was a Zinther soldier, sent from the Empire. Behind him, another 2 soldiers stood guard, weapons at the ready. James Danner, the soldier said, his voice harsh, mechanical. We have come for the princess. James stepped forward, blocking the way. She's not going anywhere. The soldier laughed, a cold, hollow sound. You don't understand, human. She is property of the Zinther Empire, and we do not negotiate. I said she's not going anywhere, James repeated, his voice steady, though his heart raced. You'll have to kill me first. The soldier didn't flinch. That can be arranged, he said, his tone flat. Before James could react, the soldier raised his weapon, aiming straight at him. Arya's hand shot out, her eyes wide, but James had already moved, knocking the weapon aside just as it fired. The blast went wide, hitting the wall with a loud explosion. Dust filled the air. Get down! James shouted to Arya, pushing her behind him as he grabbed for his own weapon, a small blaster hidden in the corner. The soldier lunged at him, but James was faster. He fired once, twice, and the soldier dropped to the floor with a thud. Arya's breath was shaky as she stepped out from behind James, her eyes locked on the fallen soldier. But she didn't have time to react. Another soldier rushed at them, and this time, Arya was ready. With a swift move, she grabbed the soldier's wrist and twisted, forcing the weapon from his hand. In one fluid motion, she slammed him into the ground, pinning him with ease. The soldier struggled, but Arya's grip was unyielding. James stood back, amazed. He had known Arya was skilled, but seeing her fight with such precision was something else entirely. He had underestimated her more times than he could count. The last soldier, seeing his comrades fall, turned to run. James wasn't about to let him escape. With a quick movement, he chased after him, tackling him to the ground before the soldier could reach the door. The The struggle was brief. James was strong, but the soldier was trained. However, James had something the soldier didn't: the element of surprise. With a final push, James knocked the soldier unconscious. Arya stood behind him, breathing hard but calm. "They're not going to stop, are they?" she asked, her voice low. James looked at her, his face set with determination. "No, but we'll make sure they regret it." Arya nodded, her expression hardening. "They'll be back," she said. "And when they do, we'll be ready." James knew she was right. This wasn't just a skirmish, it was the beginning of a war. The Zinther Empire wouldn't stop until they had her back, and that meant James had to protect her with everything he had. "We need to move," James said. "Pack your things. We're leaving now." Arya hesitated, looking at the soldier on the floor. "We can't stay here. They know where we are now." "We'll find a new place," James said. "We're not running anymore. We'll fight back. We're not afraid of them." Arya met his gaze, her eyes fierce. "I've been running for too long," she said. "I'm tired of hiding." Together they gathered what they could, preparing to leave the house that had once been their refuge. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the time for hiding was over. They couldn't stay in one place for long. They had to keep moving, keep fighting, until they were strong enough to take the fight to the Zinther Empire. As they left the house, James felt a strange sense of resolve settle over him. They were no longer just two people caught in a war they didn't choose. They were a team, and together they would face whatever came next. The Zinther Empire might have underestimated them, but James and Arya knew one thing: no one was going to stop them now. And as they disappeared into the night, they knew this was just the beginning of something bigger than either of them had imagined. The galaxy was about to change, and they would be the ones to change it. Part 6. A new beginning. James and Arya had been on the run for weeks. After their narrow escape from the Zinther soldiers, they had moved from planet to planet, staying in hidden corners of the galaxy, always one step ahead of their pursuers. But as they traveled, they began to realize something. They weren't just running anymore, they were fighting back. Every day, they grew stronger. Every day, they learned something new about the Empire and how it operated. James was no longer just a merchant trying to survive. He had become a strategist, using his knowledge of trade routes and planetary systems to outsmart their enemies. Arya, too, had grown. The quiet, guarded woman who had first arrived at his doorstep was now a warrior in her own right. Fierce and capable. One evening, as they sat in their small hidden hideout on the planet of Glimera, a cold world known for its harsh winters, James looked at Arya with a new sense of respect. They had been through so much, yet here they were, still alive, still fighting. She had proven herself time and time again, not just as a princess, but as someone who was willing to do whatever it took to protect those she cared about. "We've been running long enough," James said, his voice steady. "It's time we took the fight to them." Arya looked at him, her eyes dark and unreadable. She had never wanted this war. She had never wanted to be a part of a galactic conflict. But she had also never wanted to be a prisoner again, to be a puppet in a game. Of politics, she couldn't control. "I know," she replied quietly. "But how do we fight the Zinther Empire? They're everywhere." "We don't fight them all at once," James said, leaning forward. "We fight smart. We find their weak points, find allies, people who are just as tired of the empires. Rule as we are. We start small, build up, and when the time is right, we hit them where it hurts." Arya listened to his plan carefully, her mind working quickly. James's confidence was infectious, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might have a chance to change things not just for herself, but for the galaxy as a whole. "How do we start?" she asked, her voice filled with determination. James smiled, a glint of hope in his eyes. "We start by gathering information. I have a few old contacts in the Outer Rim, people who owe me favors. We'll reach out to them. We'll find out what we're up against. And then we go from there." The next few days were spent preparing. James used his old contacts to gather information, while Arya worked tirelessly, putting her skills to use. She was still haunted by her past, by the empire she had once ruled. But she was starting to see a future one that wasn't defined by her family's power, but by her own choices. The first contact they reached out to was a man named Roland, a former merchant turned smuggler who had a reputation for getting things done in the shadowy corners of the galaxy. James and Arya met him in a dimly lit tavern on the planet Zora. The air was thick with smoke, and the clatter of glasses and low conversations created a constant hum in the background. Roland was exactly how James remembered him: sharp, quick-witted, and always looking for an angle. When James and Arya approached his table, Roland didn't look up immediately. He was busy counting a pile of credits, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "James Danner," Roland finally said, looking up with a raised eyebrow. "I never thought I'd see the day when you came crawling back. What's the job this time?" James sat down across from him, Arya standing just behind him. "I need information, Roland," James said, his voice low. "The Zinther Empire, I need to know everything you've got on them." Roland's smirk faded slightly, but he didn't say anything. He motioned for them to sit. "You sure about this?" he asked. "The Empire's got eyes everywhere, and if they catch wind of what you're planning, I'm not asking for your opinion." James cut him off. "I'm asking for information. If you want your credits, you'll give it to me." Roland studied him for a long moment before finally nodding. All right. I've got something. A few weeks ago, I intercepted some encrypted transmissions. They're planning something big, a new weapon, something that could change the course of this war. But getting more details, it's going to take some digging. You sure you want to go that deep?" James leaned in, his eyes intense. "We don't have a choice. This isn't just about Arya anymore. This is about stopping the Empire from destroying everything." Roland nodded, his face serious for the first time. "Fine, I'll help you, but it'll cost you." James smiled. The deal already made in his mind. "We'll get it done. And when it's done, you'll get your payment." Roland stood up and handed James a small data pad, the screen displaying coordinates and transmission codes. "Get to these locations. I'll have more for you after you've checked them out." With the deal made, James and Arya left the tavern, feeling a new sense of purpose. They had a lead, a chance to uncover the Empire's next move. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give them a fighting chance. Over the next few days, they traveled to the locations Roland had given them. They infiltrated small outposts, quiet bases hidden away in the outer rim. They learned about the weapon the Empire was developing, a doomsday device capable of devastating entire planets. If it was completed, the Empire would have the power to destroy any system that opposed them. But there was more to the weapon than just its destructive capabilities. The Empire had started testing it on remote planets, ones that were far from the core to avoid drawing attention. And it was during one of their reconnaissance missions that James and Arya discovered the truth. The weapon's power source was based on a rare energy source, only found on a single planet, one that James and Arya knew well: Earth. The realization hit them like a shockwave. Earth, James's home planet, was now at the center of the Zinther Empire's plans. And if they didn't act quickly, Earth would be next on the list of targets. Arya turned to James, her face set with determination. "We have to stop them. We can't let them destroy Earth." James nodded, his expression hard. "Then let's make sure they never get the chance." The fight was far from over, but with each passing day, they were closer to something more than just survival. They were on the verge of something bigger: a revolution, a war that would shake the very foundations of the galaxy, and together they would fight until the very end.